Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Engineering Student Experience Podcast. I'm Paul Nissenson from the Mechanical Engineering Department at Cal Poly Pomona. Well, we've hit a minor milestone. This is the 25th episode of the podcast. And while I realize that's a very small number of episodes compared to many podcasts out there, that's something I'm proud of. These 25 episodes represent hundreds of hours spent finding guests and coordinating interviews, recording episodes, editing those episodes, and putting those episodes on the podcast website. Now, whether you've been with me since episode 1 or this is the first time you've listened to the podcast, thanks for the support, and I hope you find the content useful and informative. And now on to today's episode. The next time you go outside, take a deep breath. If you're in an area with a lot of sources of air pollution, like factories and power plants and vehicles that have gasoline or diesel engines, and you didn't cough or didn't experience any kind of eye irritation, well, you have air quality regulatory agencies to thank for that. If you go online and search for something like air pollution in the 1950s and 60s, you can find many images and videos from that era showing smokestacks and cars just dumping untreated exhaust directly into the atmosphere. My mom, who grew up in La Crescenta, which is just a little north of Los Angeles, used to tell me stories of growing up in the 1950s and 60s. And during the summer and early fall, when ozone and particulate matter in the area were at really high levels, it would literally hurt her to take deep breaths outdoors. Well, fortunately, during the last couple generations, there have been some dramatic improvements in air quality due to a combination of technological advancements and regulations by federal, state, and local air quality agencies. Joining me today to talk about what it's like to work at a local air quality agency is Simin Mehrabani, who is a senior air quality engineer at the South Coast Air Quality Management District, which is usually called South Coast AQMD. This is a government agency responsible for the air quality for over 15 million people, including myself, who live in an area comprised of Olive Orange County and parts of Los Angeles County, Riverside County, and San Bernardino County. Simi has a Ph.D. in chemical engineering from the University of Southern California and has been working at the South Coast AQMD for 5 years, primarily focused on issues related to permitting. During the interview, we discussed the various divisions within the South Coast AQMD, how the South Coast AQMD and other local air quality agencies work with state and federal agencies to improve air quality. We also discussed the types of jobs available to engineers at the South Coast AQMD and how engineering students can gain a foothold in this field. The field of air pollution control is constantly evolving as we learn more and more about this complicated soup of chemicals and particles that make up the atmosphere. And engineers are critical to helping make the air that we all breathe safer. Now, before we get to the interview, I just want to quickly mention that if you live in the region covered by the South Coast AQMD, the agency has a new app that allows you to check the air quality in real time. I personally downloaded the app to my phone, and it's got a pretty nice layout and is pretty informative. And I'll put a link to the app in the show notes. All right, now let's get to that interview. I hope you enjoy it. All right. Well, I am here with Simin Mehrabani, who is a senior air quality engineer at the South Coast Air Quality Management District, or South Coast AQMD for short. Simin, thanks so much for taking some time out of your busy day to be on this podcast.
Thank you. Hi. Thank you, Paul. I'm very excited to be here, and thank you for having me.
And I'm really excited to have this episode. I've been looking forward to it for a long time because my background, my PhD research was doing computer modeling of atmospheric systems. So I kind of got an informal education in atmospheric chemistry, and I actually even briefly considered applying at the AQMD when I was looking for jobs after graduate school, but ended up at a pretty nice place. I'm pretty happy at Cal Poly Pomona. So whenever I get a chance to talk to someone who works at an air quality district or agency, I always love hearing what they have to say, and I always find it very interesting.
Awesome. That's great. Thank you, Paul.
So before we get into what is the South Coast AQMD and what you do in your day-to-day activities, it'd be great if you could give the listeners a little bit of background about yourself. So, how did you become interested in engineering? I know you have a chemical engineering background, and what was the path that you took to get where you're at today?
Yeah, so I guess from early on, I was very interested in math. It was my favorite topic, and later on physics. And my mom is a teacher, my dad is a mechanical engineer. So I guess after they saw the passion and the interest, they just helped me to build a strong foundation in these subjects. And I was also exposed to, my dad would sometimes work from home, and so I would see his design drawings, which at a time were mostly by hand, or design, calculations. Like his calculator was like my favorite thing. And so I would listen to him talking with his colleagues over the phone, discussing different, engineering topics. And I was just fascinated. I was exposed to it. I really liked it. So by the time I was last year of high school, I knew engineering is what I want to pursue. So I got my chemical engineering, my bachelor in chemical engineering in Iran. And actually, toward the end of my bachelor's degree, I helped a PhD student with his research projects. And I really liked it. The idea of being able to do my own research in a lab setting, and like not necessarily enjoyed the failures, but enjoyed finally being able to do something that no one else has done before. So I moved to the States, and then I applied for the PhD program at USC. And I started my PhD in chemical engineering in January 2010. And I joined Professor Andrea Armani's biophotonics research lab. In her lab, we use these really cool optical devices, micro devices, for detection purposes. And it was mostly biodetection, so it was in liquid phase. But me being passionate about the environment, I also tested the idea of testing molecules in the air. And so as a proof of concept, I built a humidity sensor. Yeah, toward the end of my graduation, I audited a course that was offered by the former Port of Los Angeles executive director, Dr. Geraldine Natz, discussing, environmental regulatory compliance topics. And so got to know more about EPA, California Air Resources Board, CARB, and South Coast Air Quality Management District. And I looked more into the agency. I found the mission very well in line with what I wanted to do, and something that motivates me. And I signed up for the job interest cards on the website. And luckily, there were openings at the time. So I applied. And in August of 2016, I started as an air quality engineer in the engineering and permitting division at South Coast AQMD, and I was in the refinery permitting team. So I stayed there for about 2.5 years, and then I applied for the senior air quality engineering position. So it's the first level of supervisory type of role in the engineering and permitting division, ENP. So that's where I'm currently at. I'm a senior air quality engineer. I moved to a different team. It's the coding permitting team. And yeah, that's a summary of how I got to be here.
Yeah, so you mentioned that you have spent a lot of time in the permitting process. So it'd be great if you could give the listener an idea of the various kinds of tasks that the South Coast AQMD is responsible for, besides just making sure that businesses and like refineries, like you were saying, get the proper permits so they can emit certain chemicals into the air.
Yeah, so South Coast AQMD is a local agency that's responsible for improving air quality and controlling, air quality in Los Angeles, Orange County, Riverside County, and San Bernardino County. And the main goal and the mission of the agency is to protect the public health. So we focus mainly on stationary sources of emissions, and that could be large sources such as, refineries or power plants, but also smaller businesses such as a gas station or an auto body shop. South Coast AQMD develops and adopts a plan called an air quality management plan, which is like a blueprint to bring the area into compliance with federal EPA and state clean air standards. And so we adopt rules to reduce emissions. And in the engineering and permitting division, we issue permits to make sure facilities and sources of air pollution comply with the rules that have been established. South Coast AQMD also sends out inspectors to inspect different sources of emission, make sure they comply with the permit conditions and the applicable rules. And also to test whether these rules are working, we have monitoring stations to monitor the air quality. So obviously there are a lot of different divisions that are working toward different goals that I just mentioned, but I work in the engineering and permitting division, so I'm just going to go a little into more details of what we do. So any source of air pollution or any equipment or process that controls air pollution needs to get a permit from us. And so what we do is once we get a permit application from a business or industry, we look into different factors. We look at how much emission that source could be emitting. So like the potential to emit for that source is calculated in terms of the criteria air pollutants. And so we look at carbon monoxide, particulate matter, sulfur oxides, nitrogen oxides, lead, and volatile organic compounds or VOCs. And we also look into toxic air contaminants. And those, I'm not going to name all of them because there are over 200 toxic air contaminants that we regulate, but anyone interested, they can look at our Rule 1401 for the list of toxics. So for those, we also look into the potential to emit for them, and we calculate, we estimate, and we then look at the health risk from these toxic air contaminants to the surrounding receptors. And then we set limits on how much pollution from each of these sources could be emitted, and that would be a condition that would end up being on the permit. So for example, it would be a throughput limit of how much, for example, a chemical could be stored in a storage tank in a refinery, or how many gallons of paint an auto body shop could spray in a single day. Another thing that we do, we have a team in the engineering and permitting division, which looks at the best available control technology that is available. So they look around in different air districts within the state, they look at other states, they look at other countries to see what other technologies are available and are feasible to be used to control emissions. And if certain conditions are triggered, then we would require sources of pollution to install these control technologies and comply with these requirements. Another thing we do, which is to check or verify the design of control equipment. For example, if a thermal oxidizer is used to destruct volatile organic compounds to control them, we look at the retention or residence time. So we verify that to make sure if it is adequate, to make sure we have enough destruction of the volatile organic compounds. Or we look at the air to cloth ratio for baghouses. So we kind of verify the design of the control equipment. We don't design the control equipment, but we would look into the, to see certain parameters are satisfied or not. And so then we look at the rule compliance. We identify rules that are applicable to that source of emission, and then we determine whether that source can comply or not, or what conditions they need to meet to be able to satisfy the requirements of the rule. And then we would add those as conditions on their permit. And so then once the permit is ready with the equipment description and with the permit conditions, then with the help of permit services team, we send out the permit to the facility.
Wow, so that's a lot of work. um, last time I checked, there was something like, and please correct me if I'm wrong, something like 25,000, 30,000 different stationary sources in the South Coast AQMD. Does that sound about right?
Yes, yeah, we are one of the largest, or we are the largest air district, and we have almost half of the population of state of California within our jurisdiction. And yeah, about 25,000 sources and 65,000 permits.
Wow. So if just say I wanted to start a new auto shop or auto body business, so I'd have to go through that permitting process. Would I typically work with a company that has expertise to help develop that permit so that it would be in compliance with the South Coast AQMD?
So let's say for, of course, first of all, that business or industry has to identify if they are creating or controlling any air pollution. So once they do that, we have a Rule 219, that lists some processes and sources that could be exempt from permitting process, which is based on the fact that those processes and sources are identified to be insignificant sources of pollution. But if that source is not listed in Rule 219, then obviously they need to apply for a permit. Larger facilities, such as refineries and power plants, they have dedicated teams. They also can, reach out to consultants to help them out. But smaller facilities, we have a lot of different options for them to help them out. We have a small business assistance office that they can reach out to. They can go to our website, www.aqmd.gov, and find either, contact them through the website or call them, and they're going to help them out on what forms they need to fill in, how much fee they need to pay, or if the facility wants to go to our website and find out more about what type of industries and we permit, then they can see that so within the engineer and permitting division, we have different teams that are focused on different industries. For example, refineries, power plants, my team, which is coding and printing teams. So once they identify that, then they can see there are specific phone numbers that they can call in, and engineers would be able to help them out and walk them through the process. But what they need to do in summary is that they need to fill in certain forms, some general forms, and some are specific to the equipment that they have. And then they also pay the permit processing fee. And so once the engineer receives them, then any additional information that's needed, they will be in touch with the facility and gather the information. So it's not going to be that we want the facility to create their own permit. We would be issuing the permit and we would be writing the permit for them. But there would be definitely information that we need to gather to be able to write a permit for them.
So what happens if a company becomes out of compliance? What if they're emitting more than they should? What typically happens in those cases? And how do you even find out that they've been emitting more than they should?
So that would not be something that engineering and permitting division would be involved. That would be more of a compliance division. But I guess I can speak to that a little bit. We have a team that is looking at the annual emission reports. So that's one way to identify whether the source has been emitting more than what the permit condition sets. We also have inspectors that go out as part of the inspection efforts that compliance division has, and there are certain record keeping requirements that we always put on the permits. So if the records don't are showing that their emissions more than what is on the permit, then that would potentially be something that the inspectors would look into.
So you mentioned that the South Coast AQMD is our local air quality management district, and I think that there's something like 35 different air quality management districts, or sometimes they're called air pollution control districts, depending where you're at. And overseeing all of that, as you mentioned, was the in our state, the California Air Resources Board. And probably a lot of people in California, maybe they don't think about they don't think about these different agencies that are responsible. Many have probably heard about the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, the federal agency that is responsible. Can you discuss a little bit about how those different agencies are different and how they interact with each other?
Sure. So they all basically have the same goal, which is to control emissions from stationary sources of air pollution, because California Air Resources Board and EPA, they set the standards, emission standards for mobile sources such as cars and trucks. So the air districts are responsible for stationary sources of emission for the most part. They all obviously fall under, as you said, California Air Resources Board and Environmental Protection Agency. But obviously each district and each region is different in terms of, the type of businesses that are conducted. So the type of air pollution there, or different population, geographical or meteorological characteristics. And so air quality is different in each area. And so they could be focusing more on a certain pollutant than the other, area close to them. So, at the end, they all work toward meeting the state and federal air quality standards that are established. Now, South Coast AQMD has been there even before the Federal Clean Air Act of 1970. As you mentioned before, we have a large number of permitted facilities. We have almost half of the population of the state of California. And so we are usually at the forefront of developing new regulations to protect the public health and also advocating for cleaner technologies. And just to give you an example, in our jurisdiction, we have a lot of facilities that perform plating and anodizing type of operations. And so one of the toxic air contaminants that's emitted from these sources is hexavalent chromium. So prior to 2011, 2012, the only known source of emission were tanks or process tanks that were either rectified or air sparge. And so heated tanks were not known to be a source of emission of hexavalent chromium or other toxic air contaminants. But as part of a joint effort between monitoring division and also source testing, certain heated tanks were tested and emissions of toxic air contaminants were identified. And so then emission factors were established. And so currently, when we get a permit application for a process that involves heated tanks, we use those emission factors and we estimate the emission from them. And so if needed, we set limits on the temperature, concentration. If needed, we require the source to install a controlled equipment. And so basically, all the efforts went into eventually, protecting the public health. And so, yeah, I guess that's how EPA, Air Resources Board and individual agencies work together.
One of the things that I always love about this field is that I shouldn't say everything's constantly changing, but it's a constantly evolving field. So I teach a class in air pollution control at Cal Poly Pomona. I also teach a lot of courses in fluid mechanics and thermodynamics. The topics in those courses, many of them haven't changed in like 150 years. So if I was teaching a class in the 1970s, I would teach it in almost the exact, like a fluid mechanics class, almost the exact same way as I would teach it today. But so much has changed over the last generation or two in air quality that it's just this really dynamic field. And like you were talking about, we're learning about new emission sources all the time. And yeah, do you find that is that one of the things that draws you to that field?
Yeah, absolutely. It's just very interesting that, as part of my daily task, I sometimes have to look into processes that I've never known about. I don't know much about them. So, I guess I can use my engineering education to be able to do some research, maybe on the web, find some books and learn about it. But ultimately, we might sometimes have to go out and do, tests and source testing, things like that. So yeah, it's a very interesting field.
So you've mentioned how a lot of engineers who work for the AQMD, they might work in the field, checking out sources, making sure businesses are in compliance. But now imagine that I'm walking into the South Coast AQMD headquarters, which is in Diamond Bar. Is that right?
Yes.
So imagine I'm walking through the buildings now. What would I be seeing?
That is a very interesting question. I haven't been to the office for a while because we are all teleworking because of COVID. But so
In,
we have,
in 2019, what would I be seeing?
yeah, we have. So as you enter the building, we have our, of course, security guards that are on the right hand side. We have our cashier section, but no one is there right now because obviously because of COVID, we don't allow public to enter the building. But before COVID, we had applicants who can drop off the application permit application package and the check and pay the fees right there. And yeah, to the left, we have our auditorium where we used to hold the public meetings. We also have some conference rooms there. And we also have Blue Sky Cafe, which is still open, but just for, the staff within AQMD. And yeah, so that's
So where would I be seeing engineers working in all of this?
so the building has 5 stories. So most of the engineering teams are on the third floor, and only coding and printing teams and plating team, which is my team, and there are actually a few other senior engineers in this team. So we are all on the 5th floor.
I know, well, you're obviously you have a background in chemical engineering. What types of engineers would be working at the AQMD?
Yeah, we have chemical engineers, mechanical engineers, civil, environmental engineers in almost every division: engineering, permitting, obviously, planning and rule, technology advancement, monitoring, source testing, compliance division. We also have software, hardware engineers that are in information management division.
You've talked about how you have to interact with certainly business owners who want to get the appropriate permits so they can operate their business. And you also mentioned how there's an auditorium within the South Coast AQMD where they have public hearings. In what other ways do engineers interact with the public, since this is obviously a government agency?
Yeah, so I guess obviously different divisions have different needs, or there are different ways that they would interact with the public. But in the ENP, engineering permitting division, as you mentioned, the first thing is, once we get the permit application, we might have additional information that we need to ask. So we either call the applicant or send an email to them. And sometimes we before COVID, they would come to the district and we would have, face-to-face meetings, but now we are moved into virtual. So we use virtual platforms to meet with them. And also we have public notices. So sometimes when certain requirements are triggered, for example, there is a source that is within 1,000 feet of a school, then that facility needs to do a public notice before we can actually issue the permit. We obviously look at all the rules and regulations and we make sure that source complies with our rules and regulations, but we still send out, I mean, not us, we prefer the public notice, but the facility would send out the public notice. And we give 30 days for the public to be able to look at the evaluation report that we have prepared for that permit, look at the permit, its conditions. If they have any concerns or questions, they can contact us. So we have all of these ways to interact with the public, but of course other divisions have their own ways of being in touch with the public.
Yeah, and there's so many. You've mentioned a few of these various rules, like rule of 1401, and I forgot all the rules already. But and you also mentioned how there was they're responsible. South Coast AQMD is responsible for creating an air quality management plan for the district. Could you help explain the process by which new rules are created, or how do they come up with these management plans for the entire region? It's something on the order of like 10,000 square miles or something, I think that the district is. So how do they come up with that kind of the plans and all those rules?
Yeah, so that's something that a different division, which is the planning and rule division, does. And so I haven't worked in that division, so I can speak to the details. But I have been involved. Usually, when a rule is being adopted or amended, usually one or two engineers, at least from the engineering and permitting division, would also be invited to the meetings. And so, as part of that process, I have seen that basically notices will go out that, this specific rule is being amended or adopted. So public stakeholders can get involved, attend the meetings, they can send written comments, they can contact the staff in charge. It's a pretty open process. But as far as the AQMP or the air quality management plan, that one definitely would be something that maybe someone from the planning and rule division can explain better.
Yeah, and if anyone's interested, all this stuff is available online. It's all publicly available information, and I'll try to find a link to the most recent air quality management plan and put them in the show notes in case anyone out there is interested in reading. Oh God, how big is that document? It's enormous, right?
Yeah. That would be, it would be great, I guess, to have the link there. But www.aqmd.gov, that's our website. So they can search under the search bar, and hopefully they would be able to find the AQMP.
So you've been there, you've been working at the South Coast AQMD for about 5 years now.
Yes.
Um, what are some of the challenges or opportunities that you see going forward in your field of air quality management?
Yeah, so I mean, there are certainly some bigger picture challenges. For example, our this area has suffered from poor air quality for a very long time. But over time, with different measures, we have been able to reduce the air pollution significantly. I mean, I wasn't here at the time, but I hear a lot of people say that, well, before we wouldn't able to see the mountains. Now, most of the times we can see the mountains, but also like number wise, about 25% of the area's ozone forming air pollution, which ozone is like one of the air, criteria air pollutants. And unfortunately, this area is not in attainment status with the EPA standards. So for that, we have from the 1950 levels of ozone, right now we have been able to cut it to less than a quarter of what it was back in 1950s. But still, we have a long way to go. But the problem is that 25% of ozone comes from stationary sources of pollution, and 75% of it comes from mobile sources, trucks, cars, things like that. And so that's something that we don't have jurisdiction over. It would be California Air Resources Board. And but the good thing is that there are cleaner technologies, cleaner vehicles that are out there. And so we have a technology advancement office that actually incentivizes and provides incentives for businesses and industries to take advantage of these cleaner technologies. But something that, a challenge that I see in the within engineering and permit division is that, as you know, our role is to evaluate permit application versus rules and limits and make sure that the facilities comply. But these rules are being constantly amended, new rules are being adopted, and they are getting more and more complex, more requirements are added. And so we have we have to issue the permits within a certain period of time. So we have limited time, and so definitely the job is getting more challenging. And so maybe I mean, we currently have teams within EMP that are focused on streamlining the process and also possibly automating the process. For example, now for dry cleaning or dry cleaners, most of them, they can go online and submit their information and be able to get their permits through the automated system. But doing that same thing for other industries, that's something that we are currently working on. But I think that would be really cool to one day be able to get your, for example, permit for an auto body shop also through our website.
Yeah, my parents grew up in the LA area during the 50s, 60s, 70s. And my mom used to tell me stories about how bad the air was. Like in the 60s, they'd go out for PE or something, and she literally like almost couldn't breathe. The air quality was so poor. And you can find lots of videos out there, like older videos of people would just be walking around the streets of LA dabbing their eyes because the ozone was just stinging them so badly.
Right.
And it's nowadays in Southern California, it is. I grew up here my whole life, and I remember I was born in 1980, so I remember by then the air quality had been starting to get better. Like we were on the very much on the good trajectory at that point. But I still remember there'd be times where I think that we had PE canceled because the air quality was just too bad, or you could see on the horizon it would be very brown.
Right.
And it's gotten so much better since those days. But I think probably people don't have a most of the people who went through that are probably not here anymore. And so there's this living memory that's gone about how bad things were. And
Right.
I suppose if maybe if someone looks at the images that have come out of say China or India, it gives you an idea of how bad the air quality could be
Used to
here
be. Right.
if we don't
Right.
have agencies like yours. So you have a PhD in chemical engineering. How important are advanced degrees for working at the AQMD? How many do you have? Lots of employees there who have bachelor's degrees in some engineering field?
Yeah, so I mean, there are a lot of engineers with bachelor's degrees, but also some with, master's and PhD. I think, as we all know, having a PhD or a master's degree doesn't necessarily mean that you know everything about every field. It just, I guess, in my opinion, it just shows that if you're given some resources at some time, you would be able to learn a complicated topic relatively quickly. So I think that's something that is important. Like we talked about it before, there would be sometimes equipment or processes that we have to permit that we don't have any prior knowledge of it. And so I think having an advanced degree could help you to be able to, identify the right resources, to look into them and be able to understand the process faster. Another, I think, advantage of having an advanced degree is just the fact that, for example, like, as part of a PhD program, you will be doing research, and then you will be publishing the result of your research. So you also attend conferences to present the result of your work. So you just have the opportunity to learn and also polish your, for example, communication skills, written or verbal communication skills or presentation skills. I think also, as part of, for example, a PhD program, you probably get a chance to mentor other students, either as a teacher assistant or, newer PhD students that come into the lab. You get to, teach them, mentor them on different things that we do in the lab and things like that. So you just get the opportunity to kind of oversee other individuals' works. And so later, if you are interested to move up in your career and take on supervisory type of roles, you can use those experiences to prepare you better for those type of roles. And so in fact, at AQMD, one of the desirable qualifications for air quality engineers in the job postings for our agency is having an advanced degree. Another thing that I want to also add is, so when someone starts as in the engineering permitting division, there are 3 levels. So assistant air quality engineer 1, and air quality engineer 2. So depending on where you start, it takes 1 year, hopefully if you've performed well, it takes a year to move up to the next level. But if you have an advanced degree, that 1 year is cut in half. So it would be like 6 months that you can get promoted to the next level. So and of course, as I mentioned before, to move up to take on, for example, senior air quality engineer or supervisory type of roles, also as part of the interview process, you can, talk about the experiences that you've had mentoring other engineers. So yeah, I mean, I guess I can say that based on my own experience, having an advanced degree really helped me, but also there are a lot of engineers that don't necessarily have an advanced degree, but they're doing a fantastic job.
Now, during your getting your bachelor's degree and master's and PhD, I'm sure you had to use a or you had to learn a lot of math. And you said you love math earlier growing up.
Yes.
In your day to day job activities, do you actually have to use any kind of advanced math, or is it a lot of it is just basic unit conversions and algebra, or what kind of math do you use in your day to day work?
Yeah, so most of it is, algebra, because, as I mentioned before, for every permit application that we get, we have to prepare an evaluation report. So we have to estimate the emissions for that source, either criteria or toxic air contaminants. So for those, we usually use, math to, as you said, like convert units and estimate emissions. But also we do health risk assessments. So sometimes we have to do modeling, air dispersion modeling. And so for those, we also have softwares that we can use. Occasionally, it could be, geometry or calculus, but it would be mostly algebra.
Well, Simi, you've been very generous with your time today, and it's been really wonderful to talk to you. But before I let you go, I just wanted to ask if a student is interested in working for an agency like the South Coast AQMD, and let's say they're in high school or college, how can they better prepare themselves to apply for this particular job? Are there certain engineering classes or non-engineering classes you'd recommend that they take? And yeah, is there any kind of advice you could give to someone who might be interested in this field?
Yeah, of course. So definitely math and physics, I think would be vital to have a strong foundation in math and physics, and just, the basic principles of mass balance, combustion, instrumentation, just being able to understand, okay, where the raw material, comes in and goes into the process, what happens to that, and like what could be the sources of air pollution. So if there are any courses that are offered on air quality topics, I think they should definitely take advantage of those. If possible, air dispersion modeling, that would be very helpful. But also, soft skills and things that might not necessarily be taught in a class, but if they get the opportunity to be part of, for example, a project, and lead a team, or be part of just a team, be a team member, or if they get the opportunity to be part of a research lab and do research there, just developing those soft skills, being able to manage their workload, meet deadlines, be able to interact with their colleagues, and also writing and verbal skills. As I mentioned, we talk with the applicants almost on a daily basis, either it's email or phone calls. We write evaluation reports, so it's important to have, good writing skills. It's very important to have good attention to detail. And yeah, I think if they could take any projects or any courses to help them with these skills, that would be great.
So, how can someone get a foothold in this field? Are there like internships they can apply for? What would you recommend for someone who wants to work at some air quality agency?
Yeah, definitely internships. We do have paid internship opportunities that anyone interested can go online on our website and yeah, sign up for notifications, and get notified and apply. I think internships are very important. I know some of my colleagues, actually that's how they got to actually be hired at AQMD. They first did an internship. I also want to say that West Coast section of Air and Waste Management Association, AWMA, is also a great place to just network and learn more about this field. There are a lot of Southwest AQMD employees that are part of the West Coast section, including myself. And we have lunchtime webinars, we have conferences, we have networking events. We have different activities actually for students. So I also encourage anyone interested to check our website. And also, we are, I mean, since 2015, every year we have been hiring both within the ENP Engineering and Permit Division, but also other divisions. And also, I'm I think in next year, 2022, we are also going to hire more engineers. So we have entry-level positions, not only for engineers, but also like inspectors, chemists, air quality specialists. So anyone interested, I highly encourage them to sign up for the the notifications at our website to be notified when the openings are available, and so they can go online and apply for the positions.
And I'll be sure to place some links to all these things in the show notes.
That would be great. Thank you, Paul.
Yeah. So thank you so much for this wonderful conversation. I know that anyone out there who's listening will have a much better idea of what your agency does. And just in general, thanks for helping make this air that I'm breathing right now much easier to breathe.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you for having me. And yeah, I hope you have a nice day.
Thanks again to Simi for sharing her experiences about working at the South Coast AQMD. I was really excited about today's episode because it involves a field that few engineering students think about, but which is vitally important to everybody's health. Well, before I sign off, I'd like to mention that if you're enjoying this podcast, there are a few ways that you can support it. You can subscribe to the podcast using your favorite podcast app like Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Play Music, Spotify, and many others. You can rate the podcast and leave comments on whatever app you use to listen to the podcast. And finally, you can help spread the word about the podcast by telling your friends and family or anyone else you think might be interested in this podcast. If you have any comments about this episode, feel free to email me at tesepodcast@gmail.com, and I'll place the email address in the show notes. I'll personally read each email and try my best to respond to them all. I'll take care, everyone, and goodbye for now.